Hello students, this is Samyukta Singh T. In this session, I am going to talk about Matthew Arnold's essay, A Study of Poetry. First, let us know about the author. Matthew Arnold was an English poet, cultural critic who worked as an inspector of schools. Matthew Arnold has been characterized as a sage writer. A sage writer is someone who chastises and instructs the reader on contemporary issues. Matthew Arnold is considered as a sage writer because in his writings he depicted the issues which were faced by the people of his time. David Dyches, a Scottish literary historian and literary critic, called him the great modern critic because after Aristotle, Arnold was the only one who set certain rules about criticism. Uh, Arnold tried to convey that there should be some rules and regulations in criticism. Matthew Arnold was one of the first critics to declare that people could be consoled, people can be consoled, people can be healed, and people can be changed by reading a good literature, especially by reading a good poetry. Arnold influenced not only T.S. Eliot but a number of other 20th century critics, among whom Irving Babbitt, Paul Moore, and F.R. Lewis are prominent. Matthew Arnold's famous works include A Dover Beach, The Scholar Gypsy, Culture and Anarchy, Practical Criticism, and Literature and Dogma. Matthew Arnold is also called as a forgotten Victorian, and it is somewhat true also because his poetry is much less read than that of his two contemporaries, Alfred Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning. Even today, Matthew Arnold is considered as a critic rather than a poet, though he has written very good poetry. Then, coming to the essay, A Study of Poetry was originally published as the general introduction to T.H. Ward's anthology, The English Poets, which was published in the year 1880. In this essay, Arnold criticizes the art of poetry as well as the art of criticism. According to Arnold, criticism did not come from the branch of philosophy. It was not even a craft for him. According to Arnold, criticism is the art of judgment, and here he meant that a critic should learn to think objectively, critically to judge a piece of work. So he is asking the critics to judge a piece of work in a more objective way, in a more critical way. In this essay, Arnold attempts to answer, he tries to answer the two fundamental questions that are what is poetry and what is its role in human society. Let's see how he attempts to answer these questions. Arnold says the future poetry is immense because in poetry, where it is worthy of its high destinies, our race, as time goes on, will find an ever surer and surer stay. Arnold says that poetry is more timeless than any other human institution or an achievement. He even places the poetry above religion. He says that even the religion may fail, even the religion will fail at one time or another, but poetry is man's eternal wealth, or poetry can even be considered as a constant source of joy, comfort, or an inspiration for the coming race. On your right, on your left side, you can see the image of Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, which is in Berlin, Germany. This church was extensively damaged in an air raid during the World War II in the year 1943. So, Arnold here, I got this example to explain the Arnold's point here. So, according to Arnold, it may be any institution, or it may be any monument, or any statue, and even it may be the religion. It may fail one or the another day. It may be due to time, or it may be because of human force. It can be destroyed, but according to Arnold, poetry is eternal, as Shakespeare says in his Sonnet 18. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Thus, according to Arnold, we should turn ourselves to poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, and to sustain us. Then Arnold speaks about poetry as the criticism of life. Arnold asserts or insists that literature, especially poetry, is the criticism of life under the conditions fixed for such a criticism by laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. So, this poetic truth and poetic duty is the same thing which was described by Aristotle in his essay on poetics. Uh, in other words, the greatness of poet lies in his powerful and beautiful application of ideas to life. The more powerful the application of ideas, the greater will be the resulting poetry. But the application must be under conditions fixed by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. In other words, a poetry should have high seriousness, according to Matthew Arnold. Here, I would like to give you an example of poem named The Scholar Gypsy, written by Arnold himself. In the poem The Scholar Gypsy, Arnold is passing judgment on the life of his age, the life of his country, the lives of individual men. They all represent the criticism of life because they address the issues that are essential to human beings. In other words, poetry is not just about beautiful things, beautiful creation. Poetry can also be considered as the real criticism of life. Poetry can teach the reader the lesson to lead a better and a successful life. Then Arnold in this essay also speaks about the three kinds of estimates. Estimate means roughly calculating or judging the value of poetry. Arnold says that when one reads poetry, he tends to estimate, he tends to judge whether it is of the best form or not. The, the three estimates which were described by Arnold are historical estimate, personal estimate, and the real estimate. Let us know each estimate in detail. Historical estimate. It is a fallacious estimate that deals with the poets of past. When we are affected by a poet's historical background, we may easily consider his poetry is of more importance than in reality it is. Here, Arnold is asking the critics to not overrate a piece of work just because that piece of work belonged to some particular age. It belongs to some particular writer. So he is asking the readers to avoid this kind of judgment. Then he speaks about personal estimate. It is also a fallacious estimate that deals with the contemporary or modern poets. He says that our personal likings and circumstances have great power to sway our estimate. It may be due to our personal likings. We give more importance to that poetry which does not deserve that much importance. So, the second fallacy in our poetic judgment is caused by personal estimate. So, here Arnold asked the critics to avoid historical estimate and also the personal estimate. Then he speaks about the real estimate. According to Arnold, real estimate is the only true estimate which is not affected by any kind of estimate. This refers to the unbiased evaluation of a piece of work. So here Arnold is asking the critics to evaluate a piece of work more critically, and here he is asking the critics to avoid both the historical estimate and the personal estimate. So in the next session I will discuss about Matthew Arnold's touchstone method. Hope this lecture was helpful. Thank you. Have a nice day.